Signs revenue to
Yeah.
Morning. Good morning. I'd like to call the local planning agency meeting to order at 9:03. And could we call the order, please?
Sam Vincent,
Here.
Don Colapetro, Chairman Byrd,
Here.
Robert Dennis,
Here.
Rex Sims,
Here.
Fred Forbes,
Here.
Carolyn Gallagher.
Here.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is to review the following ordinances for consistency with the City of Bonita Springs Comprehensive Plan. And number A, Audrey?
Okay, this is an ordinance, I'll read the title block into the record. This is an ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs amending Bonita Springs Land Development Codes 3-440, required transit facilities for large-scale retail establishments, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, scrivener's errors, inclusion in code, and an effective date. This ordinance has an interesting history in that it was requested. I had already prepared the title block and advertised it, and since we didn't have section 3-440, I could not make the change because you can't make a change if the title block doesn't address it. I did promise that the next time I did amendments to the Land Development Code, those ads are very expensive, so I try to get them all in the same ad. I would bring the ordinance before you. So the ordinance is going through right now, same dates as the other ordinances, the second meeting in December for City Council, and then I believe January 7th is the final reading. The only change in this ordinance is the change to section 3-440, which is the required transit facilities for large-scale retail. And it just says the shelter shall be located in proximity to street lighting to provide for the security of transit patrons or provide lighting internal to the structure where streetlights do not exist at the time of shelter construction.
Any comments?
I'd just like to say thank you.
We're ready for a motion to approve?
We are.
I would make a motion, we approve this.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Next.
The next ordinance, I'll read the title block into the record. This is an amendment to the Bonita Springs Land Development Code, Chapter 4 zoning, amending sections 4-869 and 4-887 to revise the color palette and procedures in the old US 41 redevelopment overlay district to permit additional colors, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, scrivener's errors, inclusion in code, and an effective date. Again, this ordinance will be scheduled in the block of other ordinances being scheduled in the Land Development Code, with the final hearing being January 7th. This ordinance, council picked a couple pastel colors, and if you go to page 15 and 15, I'm sorry, you'll see that the 10 pastel colors are listed there. Unlike the sets, the 24 sets, these are individual pastel colors. So the question then became, what does council do with the pastel colors? And what we did, if you go to page 12 of the ordinance, you'll see that it's amending so that if you pick one of the pastel colors, you would follow additional procedures. If you select one of them, the body of the structure should have a base lighter than the selected trim or accent unless the trim or accent is painted white, because white goes very well with pastels. No more than 2 additional colors should be selected in a darker pastel or white for trim and accent, so you don't have a building with 7 or 8 colors on it. And not all architectural styles are appropriate for pastel colors. Well, it's very, I think, and I'm reading you the ordinance, I can tell you it, while it looks well on Cracker vernacular, which we have a lot out of there, or post-war modern or Art Deco, it really would not look very well on other designs that we have out in the city area. I would think Spanish Mediterranean in pastel would be a very bizarre looking building. And so the reviewer could deny if it's not compatible. Now, the code has always allowed other color choices than the set. This one is a little scary for staff in the sense that it's not being done as a set. There was a hue of pastel colors that are being permitted. We'll see how it goes. It should be interesting. No colors were taken out of the scheme, just the additional colors added. And again, As Mr. Sims has pointed out many times, if you like that darker blue, you could always ask the reviewer, and if the reviewer said no, you could always appeal it to city council.
I have a question. Who is the reviewer?
Usually Sam Vincent.
You're sitting there.
He seems like a reasonable guy.
Debatable.
May I have a question?
He did not draft this, by the way.
No, I
Did
did
not?
not.
He did not draft this language. I think he.
What, was
came
he a
up with-
walk-on or something? Or-
Basically, what happened was, council says, your staff said, don't do it. Council says, no, we want it. I started going, and so I ended up becoming the arbiter of taste, I guess. I went, looked mostly at City of Miami Beach. I looked at what made sense and did not make sense. They actually have a much more, more definitive. This is kind of a dumbed-down version of what they have on Miami Beach. You don't want to necessarily do Miami Beach either, because Miami Beach has a lot more with embellishments, and they have other styles. I think, I want to say it's Pomo. There's Mimo, which sounds like a Southern grandmother, but it's not. I think that's Miami Modern. There's about 5 different architectural subsets that they have where it would make appropriate or not appropriate. But they also, that language that says some building it's not appropriate for, there is Spanish Mediterranean and, Miami Beach. So there are some buildings that, believe it or not, Miami Beach does not want pastel.
Yeah.
And I don't think the old 41 corridor meets the Miami Beach. There is some buildings that are of the same time and genre, but it certainly is not a poster child for modern design or for that type of, if we have a developer and he suggests a Bauhaus design, I can see people down in the old 41 area saying, oh my God, this is horrible. I have no doubt in my mind when we get one of those modern buildings.
We were asked to look at Key West colors. Some of these pastels really are based on the color scheme
Okay.
in Key West.
Rex, you had a question?
Well, my question was, when we apply for a special exemption for a sign, it's $1,000. Is there any charge to apply for a special exemption for the color?
It's just, the process is, it just says take it to council, so I would tend to think, I don't know.
Yeah, at this time, we don't charge, there's no item in the fee schedule.
No,
get
I
an
don't fee
alternate
schedule.
color.
I just sit there and
Okay.
draft it up, unless council tells me that they want to charge for
Well,
my time.
then we can assume that there is no charge for asking for a special exemption for the color.
At this time, right, council could always add it.
It's not technically a special exception.
Right.
Because that's a different process, and there's criteria for that. It would just be something that we would take to Green Sheet at a normally scheduled city council hearing. If an applicant and the city reviewer could not come to an agreement on a color scheme for the building.
So you're saying no, there's no charge?
Correct.
No charge. The wording says any other change in palette colors may be approved by city council on a
Where are you,
case-by-case
Audrey?
basis. On page 12, number 2, right after all the underlined language.
Yep.
This is one that's not underlined. This is existing code.
Okay.
I have
Any
a
oth-
question.
Go ahead,
yeah.
Carolyn.
Just for my edification, I don't have any opposition to having the pastel colors added. I'm just noticing I only see pastel 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 on my sheet.
Look to your left,
To my left.
from pastel 6.
Oh, okay, I see.
Column
I made it a
Right.
double column.
And then my other question was, when do we get to see those colors?
Council saw them. I'm very black and white, no pun intended. There's 2 ways to see them. We could try to get you a copy, Debbie can get you a copy of the green sheet that went to council that has the colors. The other way you can do is if you go to Sherwin-Williams and you put in these numbers, you'll get the color.
Pastel 1, you will get a color?
No, if you put in SW714 Elder White or all those SW numbers, that's,
Oh, okay.
is it the Merrick system? Is that what it's called? there's a name for it.
Should
that-
ask the reviewer.
Yeah, I'm looking at
I
you.
don't know what the name is for the,
There's actually all these color classifications in the color wheel. There's actually, it's not the RBV system that Jay and I are familiar with. It's another system that they have in order to determine colors.
No, you-
And it's a uniform system, so, because my color blue might be different than your color blue. I
Pantone
might see it
system?
differently, right.
Yeah,
Pantone color system,
Is that what it is, Pantone?
yeah.
okay.
But you can also go online under Sherwin-Williams, and you can find these colors.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. I was just curious what shades they had decided on. I trust the council to make a good decision on that.
It's like an oil filter. All the numbers are kind of uniform, if you know one number for one system.
Yeah, but you can get them online.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Fred?
We're still with same sizes and all that on signage?
We're not on.
We're not on
Yeah, that
sign,
comes
we're on
up
color
next.
palette.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions on this particular one? Do it?
Nope.
We have a motion?
We'll make a motion. We find
Sec-
it consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
One opposed.
Who was my name?
Fred was opposed.
Okay.
Okay, next one.
Okay, the next ordinance is an amendment to the Bonita Springs Land Development Code, amending and replacing the sign ordinance, Chapter 6 of the City of Bonita Springs Land Development Code, amending the following sections: 6-1, purpose and intent of chapter; 6-2, definition and rules of construction; 6-5, prohibited signs; 6-6, permitted signs; 6-37, variances and special exceptions; 6-38, permits, inspections; 6-39, nonconforming signs; 6-40, sign setback option; 6-69, measurement of sign area; 6-70, measurement of sign height; 6-72, construction standards, landscaping; 6-73, sign and street identification and marking; 6-111, temporary signs; 6-112, permanent signs in residential areas; 6-113, permanent signs in commercial and industrial areas; 6-154, interstate highway interchange area signs; 6-115, permanent signs in the Bonita Beach Road corridor; 6-116, permanent signs on Old US 41 from Bonita Beach Road to Rosemary Street; and 6-148, billboards, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, scrivener's errors, inclusion in code, and an effective date. Okay, so this ordinance has been to the LPA multiple times. The changes, I believe, I have highlighted in yellow, and I have current editor notes that will be taken out of there. Some saying like LPA Gallagher request, because after the meeting, she had a few little issues, which meant I had to look up a lot of different definitions. It was actually very fun. I added the darks, since our last meeting, I added the dark skies provision on page 3. Since our last meeting, I also added a definition of balloon sign, and added into the banner, blade sign and feather sign. Incidentally, the term blade sign, by what the city is talking about, are the signs that, they're called blade signs, razor signs, feather signs, the ones that have, they look like a windsurfer type sail.
The air blows up into them?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Blade sign is actually used in North Carolina and South Carolina to mean a hanging sign that goes over. I had no idea until I had the pleasure of going through so many codes.
Good thing.
Human sign or living sign, a definition. Also have one for mural, placemaking, added a new definition in there. And I had a memo that went out that had all of these changes. Legal sign, as LPA requested last time, legal, illegal, and nonconforming signs were also added to the definition, and also a definition of urban core district. The other changes is monument sign on page 16. We have the sign size of where we prohibit sign backgrounds having primary and secondary. If they're smaller than 60 square feet, they can have it. If they're bigger, they can't. I do want, and that was consistent with LPA's direction at your last meeting, I do want to point out, I will be making one additional sign change for McDonald's per the city manager. And I'm looking for that section, so I go really nuts here. maybe let me go up a section or two. And that is dealing with the tandem. I learned more about spatial and linear queuing. I should have become an engineer. Because McDonald's, I had it set up for each lane could have 2 menu boards, and that did not work if you had a jump in the queue system, because a tandem queuing system. I've learned more about fast food and more about what type of queue line systems you can set up. So what we will be having is taking out the per lane and having it in for each lane not to exceed 4 total for the restaurants. It was interesting, a good learning
I
experience.
noticed that McDonald's has some sort of a temporary sign out in front that I don't remember seeing before. Is that a result of this
Not
change?
to my knowledge. Which McDonald's?
Which one is that? Which location?
The McDonald's right down here on 41 and Bonita Beach Road, it looks like what's a temporary sign out there.
Yes.
Is
Let
that a
me-
result of this?
Yes. Okay. What happened, McDonald's, this is a picture of McDonald's, first contacted us, said, oh, this is going to be terrible, terrible, terrible. We want to put a sign up. And so we met with them and said, we'd love you to put a sign up as long as you put it up according to the rules and regulations that we're proposing. And they did. They went out there and sort of a blah sign because they didn't want to pay for color or anything because they knew it was going to be temporary. So they sized the sign accordingly. Didn't quite put it as far to the west as they could. It could have been about another foot further west under the proposal. The reason is because of a ditch there. They would have had to actually built a reinforcement, which if they were for a permanent sign, they would, but for a temporary sign, they didn't want to do that. But then they built that out there, and that would be the height that's allowed and the location that's allowed, plus or minus a few inches, and the area that's allowed. Now, it doesn't have the colors that they would be allowed to have, simply because, from their perspective, they're looking to put something up there to show it. And if you look in these 2 slides, you can actually see the sign further than you could see the McDonald's sign that's there now, because of the location of it. It gets it out towards the traffic. The trees of the plaza don't hide it. It would actually be a better location. We met with them on site after they did that and after they saw what it was. We haven't had any more conversations about size and location for McDonald's. So, in our opinion, and we were very candid with them, said, look, if you're willing to do it, we'll get you a temporary permit to do it. Because if we're wrong, it'll show we're wrong, and if we're right, it'll show we're right. It seemed like a reasonable thing to do, and they decided to do that, and we think it shows that what we're trying to accomplish actually works.
Going to mess up a good argument if we end up doing stuff to make it more visible. Let me just go through the additional changes to the ordinance since LPA last saw it. On section 6-7 on page 19, even though we said, nah, don't change it, at the end of the day, I thought it might make sense to say, the section shall not be interpreted as prohibiting car wraps to be parked in regular spaces during non-operating business hours. So it's very clear, car wraps are in there. It's not prohibited to be up front, again, you're not supposed to use the cars as advertising, but if it's non-working hours and you have your delivery fleet out front, that's just having the cars out front. The next change is on page 22. I revised section 6-37, basically to soften the considerations. I think the language was very harsh or judgmental, and I modified it to be a
Very
little
good.
softer.
Very good.
Thank you. Section 20, on page 25 is the next language, which is, again, I'm going to make a minor modification in here. Wait, maybe not here yet. We did make the modification that McDonald's requested to increase the percentage to 50% from 25% for repair and refurbish for nonconforming. In other words, you don't lose your nonconforming until 50% as opposed to 25%.
Where are you, Audrey?
On page
Right.
25,
25.
and
In non-conforming sign definition.
Right, so we softened, the 50 is the existing, and we left it at the existing for repair and refurbish, as opposed to 25%, which is, a easier threshold to make a sign non-conforming. The next change, again, was on page 38, so we went quite a bit. And on 38, the change was to revise section 113 monument signs. We had 300 feet in one section and 330 in another. Remember, we talked about surveyors and links, the conversation. So we corrected that, and then we moved the sole sentence relating to Bonita Beach Road corridor in section 6-115 into section 6-113, so that we could just get rid of a whole section instead of leaving one little sentence. Page 39, the change was just as to the logos, that we're going with federally or state registered trademark. Remember, we had the conversation that seems to be fair. It's really not expensive or hardship for people to register, given the price is very inexpensive, and actually it's very easy. You can handwrite the documents, it's very easy to do so. On page 41, we did not make a change. This was the one that Councilmember Gibson at the council meeting had requested us to look at deleting interior drives for sign visibility. LPA decided not to strike it, so I just want to make it clear. That was part of your discussion at your October meeting. Menu boards, that's the one on page 42 that I will be probably revising. I think it's on page 42. I'm going to go nuts here. The menu board stuff, I will be making one more, I'm sorry, it's on page 43. I'll be making one more change to it. And basically so that instead of saying for each ordering lane, because of this tandem lane issue, I'll be correcting that language one more time. And hopefully I will be done with it by that point. On page 44, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, we changed all the monument sign height into section 113. We created a new sentence in there, so we were able to delete that whole section. So that gives us a few more pages. And LPA had no changes to the old 41 area, so I'm now up to page 53, and that's where we, Scott Hertz and I had made changes, and that's the final language, which I believe you concurred at your last meeting, so there's no changes necessary there. Staff had several meetings, or workshops for the public. I'll have them report on that, and anything else that they wish to talk about since the last change. They're more visible, I'm more verbal
Sure.
and straight to the ordinance.
We had two workshops here in Chambers, and we had an additional workshop with the Chamber of Commerce. I forget how many thousand emails went out inviting businesses to attend. We did have attendance from Circle K when they came in, and we talked to them. At the Chamber, we had a rather light turnout. We did have some shopping center owner and one sign company come in and discuss their concerns. And ironically, we had very few business owners, businesses themselves come in. The biggest concern in the discussions we had seemed to be shopping center people concerned about being able to lease, getting additional revenue from their signs if the signs are smaller, that have less space to lease their the tenants. And we politely explained to them that our concern is placemaking. Our concern is the aesthetics is not how they go about that, respectfully. And of course, we had one sign company. We had met previously on 3 occasions with 6 different sign companies. One sign company to come in and basically my interpretation of the comments was They were more concerned about their loss of revenue if they can't keep changing those little replaceable signs if those go away. We explained to them that we don't control content, that if an owner of a center wants to have a bunch of little strips for each business, he can do that, that we are encouraging placemaking, that we're writing regulations that we hope would encourage a shopping center to become a place of destination, but we don't control content. And so those things that they were concerned about, that was really their own decisions to make, nothing that we're doing. So I think overall, we had some positive comments. We had a lot of conversations about the percentage of non-conforming, and we explained that we have in the code currently, and we've talked about this in the past, that we have two different ways that it's been viewed. One is the 50% damage, you have to replace it. One was at 25%. At the 25%, though, you could change copy. At the 50%, you couldn't change copy. And so there was a balancing act, and we took the 25%. That's what was originally on the Bonita Beach Road corridor, believing that the ordinance, when it was passed, the overlay ordinance for the corridor, the intent was to make things better, clean that entryway up, and to go ahead and hold with those standards. But there was a lot of conversation about that, and there's a breakdown of that. We have talked about color. We had a conversation about the primary colors in the sign. One of the things that we discussed and we had agreed to, after many discussions with McDonald's, is that if you have a monument sign and if the overall square footage of the sign is 60 square feet or less, you could have your primary colors. That seemed to be practical. It also seemed to fit in after meeting with McDonald's and several other companies. You find these companies, they have a standard size, and actually 60 square feet is plenty for them. Most of their standard signs are either 5 foot by 5 foot or 6 foot by 6 foot. So you're looking at a 25 square foot sign or a 36 square foot sign. And so they would be able to have their logo. In talking with McDonald's and in some observations that we've made, words are less important for most of these people. McDonald's doesn't know, they have a lot of signs now that don't even put McDonald's, it just has the arches. And because they've become so recognized for that. And so we felt that was appropriate, that within that smaller sign area, that the regulations for the primaries would be dropped. I think overall that's, in a nutshell, we had met with McDonald's, a lot of concern about how something could be interpreted in the future as far as the number of ordering stations at drive-throughs. And the drive-through business is in a constant state of evolution right now. Dual lanes, dual order stations from one lane, and of course, you know, the way the order is written now, we thought, and it's still our belief, that we could permit, just like we always have permitted them, they have those. They were concerned, and so we have, you know, made those modifications. Answer any questions or?
Any questions?
Yes, I have a couple, Mr. Street. This non-conforming, on page 26, we have non-conforming sign definition. And I have a couple of questions, and I think since we've changed this, there's a little confusion here. But anyhow, does item on page 25, let's start off with non-conforming signs. Let's take item 2 under 639 down here. A legal sign which conforms to the regulations that are currently in effect. So does that mean currently in effect now or currently in effect after this ordinance is passed?
Yeah, actually, what we have here is that 1, 2, and 3 are 3 different types of signs.
I understand that.
Okay? So a legal sign which conforms to regulations that are currently in effect, that would be a legal sign once this is adopted. Whatever is
Okay.
So if it
Item
meets the
number
regulations.
1 is prior,
Correct.
and item number 2 is after this ordinance is passed.
Correct.
Okay? Then, the
For the
thing that
subsequent ordinances.
brings up the
Or
next
subsequent
question is the next page, item D over there. So here, we're changing so that a sign becomes non-conforming, but under D, it says it shall be removed immediately. It shall be immediately brought into compliance or shall be immediately removed. Is that in the next 6 months, the next 6 weeks, 6
That's-
hours?
That's only a sign that loses its non-conforming status.
Well, everybody up there is going to be non-conforming.
I can add the sentence, any sign that loses its nonconforming status will be considered an illegal sign, and then you follow the language in there.
It's any sign that loses its non-conforming status, which would be under C, it tells you how you lose your non-conforming status. So,
We've done it here too,
correct, it's listed there for you. So,
in addition to this. I mean, there's additions there that aren't here.
No, actually, the
No.
conditions are all set forth in the C above. And I'll give you an example. C number 3, if more than 25% of the copy area is removed or unassembled for a period of more than 6 months. So if someone starts to disassemble their sign and the sign sits vacant for 6 months or disassembled for 6 months, they can't say it's non-conforming. It becomes illegal after that 6 months. So the opportunity for them to change the copy, the opportunity for them to maintain it is there. But on the other hand, if someone just lets that sign go fallow, for lack of a better word, they take the copy off and it just sits there for 6 months, then they lose their right to the non-conforming status.
Well, and normally when you get a notice that something does not comply, or you get a notice that there's a $250 a day fee until you get it fixed, and so I just wondered what kind of grace period we're gonna have in here for them to either remove the sign or immediately bring it into compliance. We're gonna have 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months?
most of the time, you'll find out if you have a non-conforming sign as a result of one of these when you come in for a permit. And sometimes that's when we've seen that, where they want to go ahead and pull a permit to change the copy. Like, we require a sign permit for changing copy, even on changeable copy signs, the multi-tenant panels, because of situations where we have to review the copy area to see if it's still conforming or not.
Yeah, but all signs that are internally illuminated are automatically non-conforming now. So,
That's only for,
so that's not something that can be rendered with just getting a
but
permit.
that would be downtown. Downtown's the ones that, we don't allow for the internal illumination.
So that's not something that can just be handled by going down and getting a permit. I mean, the whole thing has to be redone.
Well, but that's a perfect example, and let's use that example, okay? The sign is a legal, non-conforming sign, so it exists, it's a non-conforming sign. It was at one point in time in the past, prior to this ordinance or some other ordinance, it was legal. And so now it's a non-conforming sign, so it can continue. It only becomes a problem if you fail to maintain, you fail to keep the copy on it, you start to disassemble it, and within that, if that occurs continuously for 6 months, then it becomes an illegal sign and it'd have to be removed. So, I mean, unless, and there are a few around town.
There are 9 on Old 41 I can count, so.
But no, there's a few around town that you can point to where the copy's been gone,
Yeah.
okay? And then it's a code enforcement issue for the code to say, hey, it's been more than 6 months, and you need to correct this. And code enforcement, that's not us, they make
Right.
their timeframes and so forth. But as long as people, generally speaking, are actively maintaining their signs, barring some, a school bus driving over it, knocking it down or something, they should be able to, well, a dump truck
Dump truck.
driving over it, knocking it down, you should generally be able to keep and maintain those.
Okay.
And that's the intent.
Now, my next question is, we've heard testimony here in previous sessions that this did not apply to Old 41. And yet, 6116 has 2 pages of things about Old 41 that effectively eliminate 10 business signs on Old 41. And as I read it, once they are determined to be non-conforming, then they fall into this period that they have to be replaced.
Okay, let me make sure we,
So does this apply to Old 41 or does it not?
yes, the sign code applies throughout the city.
Okay.
The difference is that there's no changes being made to this other than to the Old 41 that isn't already in existence for Old 41.
Okay?
So the Old 41 section of this code that you read now is the code as it is currently written. We have not made any changes to the Old 41 portion of the code. So what you're reading here is the sign code as it currently exists affecting Old 41.
So let me give an example. You may have a sign in Old 41 that is a legal, non-conforming sign. Is the sign affected because we changed the legal, non-conforming section? You bet. But it's affected that it's clarified. I don't think it's affected that it's substantively affected. We did not change what size, type, and manner of signs are permitted in the Old 41 area. Now, I did leave it in here so that if the LPA wants to make changes, because people came up at the council meeting saying, hey, you're affecting my business and I'm in Old 41, well, you know, I want to make it so that we can make it right for the Old 41 folks, because the city spends a lot of time trying to get redevelopment out there. So if there's things that the LPA wants to do or recommend for that area, I'm willing to draft up those changes. But the ordinance is, for the whole city. But as to the particular requirements for Old 41, those are contained in section 6116, which I don't believe there were any changes.
I have a question. Rex mentioned that there were 9 signs that he'd counted
Including Shangri-La, for example. That's
on Old 41 that are non-conforming, and I think Jay said that they didn't have any lettering on some of them. So are you saying that they have 6 months in which to bring those up to non-conforming?
Well, the one that I can think of right off the top of my head, it's actually in the Bonita Beach Road corridor and the Old 41 corridor, is just to the west of the Circle K. There's a sign there that the owner has taken all the copy off it, okay? And when that hits 6 months, which I think it already has now, when that hits 6 months, it becomes an illegal sign, not just non-conforming, but illegal. And at that point in time, code enforcement notifies them that they need to correct the situation. Why they did that, or why an owner would do that, I mean, that's beyond me.
But that could be any place.
But that could be any place.
Right.
I mean, typically what you find is that most owners, they're very protective, as Mr. Sims will attest to their sign. They make sure they maintain it, they make sure that they keep it, and so forth. But you do have those, and just the fact that it's in disrepair, I mean,
So most of these in reality, apply to signs that have just been more or less, for lack of another word, abandoned, just left.
that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Do they get any warning that they're looking at being made illegal? I mean, I wouldn't think every business owner out there is aware of the code and the 6-month restriction.
We don't have a sign registry requirement. In some places, I think San Antonio has signs. If it's a non-conforming sign, you have to register the sign as a non-conforming. They have a list. They periodically update that list. We don't, I mean, we have a very small government, so it's not done that way. I think that usually, if somebody comes in and they quickly correct it, we're not going to.
And
to the
Yeah, but if
6
somebody's sick or something and their family doesn't realize that they need to get the sign up to speed, so to speak.
I can tell you that there's not a formal process for that, but that's one of the reasons there's a 6-month time frame. It'd be one thing if you said 30 days and so forth. But I will tell you that people oftentimes come in to community development for pre-app. They want to put a business in a center. Perfect example is on the corner of Industrial and Bonita Beach Road, there's a car lot. And they walked away from it. And they came in and they came in and they came in, and we kept telling them, you got 3 months left. You only got 2 months left. Well, they came back in and exercised their right, and they have that use back. And it went 5 months. Did we formally, hey, knock on the door, you could lose this? No. But whenever somebody comes in, we're very cognizant of telling them, hey, if you're looking at this property, it's been this long, this is what's happened. And that happens with what we'll call non-conforming uses. You may have a use that 50 years ago, before the zoning changed over time, is in a location, maybe it's in an inappropriate location, and they can continue as long as they do that. But if the business goes out of business, and if 6 months go by, that use cannot be.
If I could ask, I think, Rex, this probably leads us back to your original question. If you're cited, then do you have a grace period to correct it? In other words, when you're cited, you then know definitely that you have a problem. So you're asking, or did ask, is there a grace period? And maybe there should be if there's nothing that's said about it right now.
And even further than the grace period, if there are mitigating circumstances, like illness or something.
Yeah. I will tell you, when there's a hurricane, we have build back policies, and signs would come under that also. When there's a hurricane or emergency, I think usually we have some direction in those executive orders.
And I think we're probably looking, this is a solution looking for a problem. 6 months is only established when we can prove that the sign has been vacated or is no longer in compliance. So you're saying, does anybody give notice? Well, no, there's no formal notice, but time doesn't start until we can show that time starts. Unless there's documented proof that there is a true illegal sign, we cannot start the 6-month process. So there doesn't need to be any type of notice or process or additional regulation here, because we have to initiate that process. The burden is upon us to show that the sign was vacated.
Yeah, well, my experience is if you are cited, you need that documentation if you have to go to code enforcement. Because a hearing examiner is going to say, well, was this individual notified? How can you prove that it's been 6 months? So I'm pretty confident that code enforcement does a pretty good job in establishing a date when that violation was found. And also, I've also found that with code enforcement, if you have a problem, they will work with you in trying to resolve the issue. It's not like getting a ticket, for speeding. They're pretty reasonable in terms of if you have an issue that they need the help from them, they will provide you with time, a buffer, whatever it needs to resolve it. So they're pretty good in that respect. So I don't have a problem with it.
That's right. And the main goal, the instructions and the directive they've been given is compliance. They are not been told to go out and cite for the sake of citing. Their goal is to bring everybody into compliance with the current regulations. So what Mr. Thinnis said is exactly correct.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Rex, go ahead.
I'm sorry, let anybody else go ahead?
Well, I'm going to have a couple when you're done, Rex. Go ahead.
Well, Audrey and I can have this little discussion, but Mr. Sweet, one of the things that we keep talking about and comes back to my mind time and time again is that a person goes and gets a permit at some time in history, either last month or 15 years ago, and he does all the things that he's supposed to do to comply with that permit. He gets an electrical permit and all this sort of thing that goes with it. And then somehow, very mysteriously, through some action that is taken here, that all at once he's non-conforming. And I had a big problem with that. And we've discussed this on numerous occasions. And so our instructions that we get every time we have one of these sessions is, how does this comply with a comp plan? So I went back to the comp plan, and under policy number 1 24:1, it says very clearly, I think, but maybe I'm not reading it right. It says existing inconsistent uses shall be allowed to continue until voluntarily removed, but shall not be increased in size or intensity, and once voluntarily removed or abandoned, shall not be reinstated. Now, it doesn't say buildings, it doesn't say anything, so signs which have to have a permit would apply here. And so it says existing inconsistent uses. In my mind, inconsistent and non-conforming have the same definition. Perhaps I'm not reading it right. So I'm saying that if I have a inconsistent or non-conforming sign, I'm allowed to continue until I voluntarily remove it. And that's in the charter of Bonita Springs when we incorporated this thing and we wrote it. It's on page 1-30. So I'm having a little trouble saying, well, what we're doing here is consistent with a comp plan, because the comp plan very clearly, in my mind, says that you're allowed to voluntarily continue this until you hang it up. So I'm saying there's a conflict here between what the comp plan says, the policy in the comp plan, and what we're saying here, that we're mandating a legal permitted structure or sign to become non-conforming, and once it becomes non-conforming, it says it shall be immediately withdrawn.
Rex, it sounds like, though, that what doesn't make sense to me is the fact that an individual with a non-conforming condition would be allowed to continue that to an indeterminate time.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
The other thing is, I think you need to look in the comprehensive plan. We also have definitions in the comprehensive plan for nonconforming use. And in there, it made it very clear that you can have ordinances that have different times for making that determination nonconforming. Because, for example, a sign, let's go like a little stick in the mud sign. If that's a nonconforming use, I mean, that should be able to be, summarily thrown away, where somebody who spends a lot of money, you want to treat differently because they've expended a lot of revenue for it.
I
But the comp
agree.
plan also has a definition
Yes.
on nonconforming use. And I think when you read, the policy you just read, you also need to read that definition, which is nonconforming uses. Uses of land and structures and characteristics of uses which are prohibited under the terms of the comp plan and zoning ordinance, but were lawful at the date of the ordinance's enactment. They are permitted to continue, or they are given time to become conforming. The continuation of such nonconformities is based on a principle that laws cannot be applied retroactively unless there is a compelling reason, such as imminent danger to health, to do so. While ordinances permit legal nonconformities to continue, they prohibit the substitution of a new or different nonconformity, nor do they permit the extension or enlargement of nonconforming uses. Many ordinances permit the rebuilding of a nonconforming use when destroyed by fire, but if the use is abandoned for a specified period of time, it cannot be restored, and the future use of the premises must conform to the zoning. Such ordinances provide for the abatement, amortization of all of or some nonconformities at the end of a prescribed period. Increasingly, ordinances are distinguished among classes of nonconformities to include nonconforming lots, nonconforming buildings or structures, nonconforming uses of land with minor structures only, nonconforming uses of major buildings and premises, and nonconforming characteristics of use, and are provided for their individualized treatment. This is also part of the comprehensive plan,
Yes.
and I think,
I agree with what you say there, because you have to remember the context of which this was written. This was not a brand-new city. There were buildings and signs here. And so when this was written, it took those existing buildings and signs into consideration and said, in essence, existing, that means the ones that were here when we became a city, or buildings that were here when we became a city, existing inconsistent uses shall be allowed to continue. And you just read where you could not retroactively issue ordinances
correct.
that would apply to this. So I'm saying that any business or building or sign that was permitted prior to the time of the city is specifically exempted under this policy.
Oh, and I disagree.
And you gave an out too.
I think
You
there's outs,
read an
yeah.
out.
Yeah, and if you read that logic, we would still have the painted bus located on Terry Street, because that was existing prior to the city. You know, we worked with the property owner.
But
we
it
did
wasn't
things-
permitted. You see, this says,
Well, and a lot of the signs that we're talking about were probably pre-permitted requirements too. I mean, we have the Carter signs or the old Wonder Garden signs. We have billboards that probably went up prior to billboard regulations. I mean, we have remember, sign code pretty much didn't come into effect till like, what, 70?
there was a world before
You're right.
we became a city. And it was called Lee County. And you went up to Lee County at a great expense and time and effort, and you got a permit. So there are literally thousands of permits that were issued
And
and
we-
in existence when we became a city. What this says is those buildings and those signs and those permits are allowed to continue. And you just read where you could not retroactively go back and make
Unless
them
there's-
void, and here's what we're doing right here.
I would suggest something a little bit different, because if you read that, it says that there are several types of nonconformities. There's nonconforming use of the land, nonconforming use of the property, the building. There's nonconforming structures. A sign is a nonconforming structure rather than a nonconforming use. Now, when you look at that and you think about nonconforming structures, there is a valid interest to make sure that structures become conforming for simple reasons such as hurricane codes and everything else. You have buildings that were built too low, and someone comes in and they want to remodel, they got to bring that up to flood. Why? Because we don't want people dying in a flood. There is a valid difference between a nonconforming structure and a nonconforming use. The use of the property, that is a different standard by which that you have to voluntarily give it up or abandon it for 6 months. Abandoning it is the same thing as voluntarily giving it up. So when we talk about uses, we need to distinguish between a use and a structure. Signs, for the purpose of this ordinance, are structures. So it becomes non-conforming because of its size, its location, its shape. Those are the things that the sign code specifically addresses. And so when something becomes in non-compliance with the rules, it changes, it doesn't meet one of those standards. You can continue it, and there's a variety of ways that you can continue it. But at some point in time, like all buildings, like all structures, it has a useful life, and then it eventually needs to be either repaired or replaced. There's a standard by which you can repair it or replace it or bring it in conformity by doing a new structure. And even within the comp plan, it said there that you can figure out how you want to abate that. You can amortize it, you can come up with a percentage. The city has always chose the percentage method for abating that. And so the fact that this percentage is in there is what makes it in compliance with the comprehensive plan. If that wasn't in there, or if some sort of amortization wasn't in there, I would agree with you, it wouldn't be compliant with the comprehensive plan. The fact that the definition exists the way that it does, and that you have this abatement program, how you treat them, brings it in total compliance with the comprehensive plan.
I disagree. I think that this is in 100% in opposition to the policy we have here. Now, you mentioned that there's a time limit on this, useful life, and that's exactly what it says. It says it shall be allowed to continue until voluntarily removed, but it can't be improved on or increased or the use. We're talking about the use, and the use of a sign is as an advertising sign. It's not a structure, it's not a gasoline pump. It's to create a message for a business. So I think we're confused in the definition here, but in my mind, if you were permitted prior to the time it became a city, when we wrote the policy here, the policy has not been changed, and so that policy, in my mind, is still in effect.
If I could, and then I'll let John, I think where you need to focus in policy 1.4.1 is look at the term once voluntarily removed or abandoned, because there is abandonment by neglect. There's abandonment by non-use. And to me, those are voluntary. The city, when I read that policy, what they're talking about is if the city goes out, we physically take the property, at that point, that's not the voluntary removal or abandonment. If you fail to comply with our codes, I think at that point, you have the voluntary removal or abandonment. As LPA member Gallagher pointed out, some of the people might not realize that they're neglecting their property, but there is the concept of abandonment by neglect. That is not a new legal term. I think we've all heard about that more than 100 years ago. John?
2 quick points. And then I think that either we come to a resolution or we just agree to disagree. One is that advertising signs are specifically listed as structures. So there really is not much debate as to whether it's a use or a structure. It's specifically listed as a structure. The second is your interpretation of the government reaching back and retroactively applying an ordinance to a use or a piece of property is not something I think that we disagree with, but I think it's how you go forward with that is where we have the issue. If this signed ordinance were to pass as it is currently written, nobody is saying that you tomorrow have to go out and change your sign. That sign continues as long as it is maintained and as long as it is used for a period of time that could go on forever until there are 6 months in which it is not used or it is not in compliance, in which case it must be brought up to current standards. This is really no different than any other change in the code in which you have supported in the past. Because the argument that you're making here is that we cannot make any changes on somebody's legally permitted property going into the future. But we've done that numerous times from the time the city was incorporated until today. This is just the latest version of a change in our regulations or a proposed change in our regulations. So whether it is the agricultural overlay in which we address some things in San Carlos Estates, which were legal, then were not legal, or whether it's a sign code, we've presented these type of situations to you in the past, and we've had the exact same situation, and this ordinance, if passed as proposed, will not be treated any differently. A sign that is legal today will be allowed to remain until it is vacated or becomes illegal under the proposed section that we're presenting. So if you have a legal sign, that legal sign stays. If that sign is vacated, if that sign, the copy is removed, any of the other sections that would then create an illegal sign would then require that sign to be brought up to current standards.
I agree with what you've said up to this point. But once this is adopted, that changes.
How is that?
Well, because what you're talking about now is signs that are there will continue to be there. It's a voluntary thing until...
No, it's not voluntary. Well, to a certain extent it isn't, to a certain extent it's not.
It's voluntary until you modernize or tear them down or whatever. But once this is passed, we have a new set of rules go in. So this takes away the voluntary part which exists today. This takes that away. Yes, it does.
But, all right,
Show you a
then
number of times that you have made the exact same decision in the past.
And let me give an example. When we adopted the Bonita Beach Road Corridor Ordinance, this group made the threshold 25% as opposed to 50%. Okay, so at that point, very early, at that point, that was the same year you were adopting the comprehensive plan. You were already saying that, how you interpret policy 1.4.1, you're allowed to modify non-conforming uses to make it stricter or make it more lenient if that's the determination of what you want. I think one of the bigger problems, and I'm going to ask John to refine his answer a little bit, because John is, the professional planner, so he's the one who would have to testify in court whether it was consistent or inconsistent. Is there a difference between an inconsistent use and an inconsistent structure? Okay. Does the comprehensive plan define structure differently than use?
Yes.
Okay. And policy 1.4.1 applies to inconsistent uses, correct?
Correct.
And he's looking at my board because we actually have it up on the screen here. So an inconsistent use, we're not prohibiting in the sign code the right to have a sign located on the property. We're only prohibiting the type of structure going forward and through the nonconforming.
One little correction here. You're forgetting the first word, existing. Existing, because and I was one of the guys that wrote this. So when this was written, we were already had buildings and signs and gasoline pumps and all sorts of things here, and the comp plan had to encompass an existing situation. And that's what this does. This creates this does not really apply to things that have been issued by the city in later years, in my mind. This says existing. So the buildings and so forth will be allowed to continue, because that was the way we wrote it when we formed the city.
Well,
You know,
Rex, if I could say, Rex, when that was written, how could your intent be that something that is existing would be that way forever?
It wasn't the plan, it's voluntary. We didn't want, or we didn't think that there was a city's duty to, immediately after they become a city, tell you, well, you gotta tear your place down because it's too close to the road.
But what you're saying, though, is that if I have an existing building or sign, I'm using it, but I have to voluntarily want to change it. Otherwise, it stays like that forever.
No, if you voluntarily do it, you have to comply with the code.
Right, but if you don't make any changes whatsoever, that, whatever it is, can stay that way forever.
Well, apparently that was the thought, because the whole idea of incorporating the city is that the city would serve the citizens. And so we were attempting to create a service commodity for our community. So we didn't want to have you, because there were places that were built right on the sidewalk, I think of the building next to the fire station was actually built on the sidewalk. And so obviously,
Yeah.
we didn't want them to
Right.
nail a notice on the door the day after we became a city, you had to tear this thing down because somebody's living in it. But, so the idea was we had to gradually go into this thing, and so existing facilities were exempted. And to my mind, they still are. Haven't been
But the thing that does is it says that there's no room for progress as long as something is existing. They can always remain that way.
No,
I don't-
it's a voluntary thing.
Well-
And as John mentioned, everything has a life. Everything has a life.
Right.
Mr. Sims, I think that we agree as to the philosophy and as to the intent. I think our disagreement comes in the fact that we do not see eye to eye in what is proposed in the language.
John,
I have a problem with that right there.
seems to me that section in the comp plan has defined nonconforming. So it's a moot point, really.
Right, a voluntary removal would be loss of nonconformity. I mean,
Correct.
if you, to me, it's voluntary if you neglect your sign. It's voluntary if you remove your sign. Those are, if you fail to repair your sign, if you fail, to do things for certain times, that might be abandonment by neglect, and I know, that's certainly a voluntary thing.
Yes, but if you do everything you're supposed to do, you get all the permits and you put it back 15 feet and you do all the things you're supposed to do, then I have a problem with somehow down the road here that we wave the magic wand, and what you have done legally is now a non-conforming issue.
You mean loss of non-conforming?
Loss of conforming.
No,
Because what you
no,
had
let's
bef-
get very clear. You have a legal sign, illegal sign, and non-conforming, because we had a heck of a problem when we started using the term conforming sign. So let's call our definitions what they are, because when we started creating new definitions, that created a lawsuit for me. So, sorry for getting
We
strong
don't
on
want
this.
that.
So let's look at what the terms are. We have non-conforming sign, and your concern is loss of non-conformity. We can go
we're doing
through the
here.
6 different elements of how you create a loss of non-conforming. If you think one is incorrect, and that's where we had the repair or refurbishment, and we said, okay, 25% threshold, we'll change it back to 50% threshold.
If the owner abandons it or is negligent, there would be no reason why it would not be non-conforming, because it's an abandonment sign. But if everything is the same as it was before, you have a legal permitted facility with electrical permit and all those fun things, I have a problem with how it can automatically change its status.
Well, at this point, I really don't know if anybody's going to be changing their opinion. If there are any other questions, we can go through those. And maybe if you'd like to come back with this or include this opinion in a motion, that would be
I'll
fine.
give counsel, if you want to review the ordinance, determine it's consistent, and then have a separate motion on non-conforming because I think your only concern is the non-conforming provision, correct?
I'm,
Are you saying we can't change ordinances ever?
no. That's not what we incorporated the city for.
Thank you.
Policy number 141, the first word is existing. And that's the key. Here we're doing something that we're changing existing to a new policy.
I have a suggestion. Why don't we sidestep this just for the moment?
Okay.
See if there's any other questions, then we can come back to that, maybe address it somehow in a motion.
Yes, sir.
Fred?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions in it, and that's, number one, you go down to Collier County, isn't, their big monument signs, isn't it more like 60 feet instead of 96 square feet?
You probably did better.
Collier County does have different height and square footage requirements.
Right.
Under our proposal, we're just restricting the copy area by the height and width of the sign.
Right, and then in addition to that, Collier has a more generous setback from the right-of-way of the road.
Correct.
Okay. Let me say what I think, which is probably not going to be the view of the group, and that's fine because majority will rule, and really what counts is what city council. Having looked at the Collier and some other stuff, it seems like our ordinance is a lot more cumbersome. We're giving people a lot more than the competition, very successful competition, permits. Both Collier, and for those that don't like the word, I'll say it anyway, up in Estero. And I think we'd be better off to stay with what we got for now, and hopefully, city council will pursue getting this world-class street vision firm in here. And signage is a main accessory to good design and good vision. And hopefully, they would be able to provide some recommendations to the city that would make sense, address what Rex is talking about and all that. So I will be voting no. That's the reason. There's a lot of good work gone into this. I don't disagree with everything, but a lot of the things I'm not comfortable with the signs being right up to the right-of-way. I know the comment is, well, landscaping will grow up. Well, all you have to do is put landscaping that's low. You can take care of that. I've gone around and driven and looked at different things with my wife, and there are signs that are really nice monument signs that are way, way below the 96, they're down at 60 and 40 square feet. And the other thing about Bonita Springs especially is that we have a lot of what you call narrow lots, and you're going to have lots and lots of these signs. So I just think that we're better off to stay with what we have for now. I think it should be improved, but that's my rationale. Now, you all, if you don't agree with that, that's fine. I don't want to have anybody, I don't want to lose a friend over it, let's put it that way. Just a different
Mr.
point of
Chairman,
view.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, no, well, you don't have to love me.
Mr. Chairman, Fred brought up quite a few good comments, and I think the problem is the city inherited an ordinance that had never been looked at for years and years and years. It is so far behind the time. If you look, for example, only because I know it very well, if you go to Boca Raton and you saw their ordinance, it's probably half the size of the one that we have here. Because this ordinance is just so cumbersome to deal with. It's hard to work and change an ordinance that is very difficult to handle and try to interpret. So I agree with her. There's a lot of stuff that I don't like, but we've got an ordinance and we're going to have to deal with it.
Well, if we were just going to simply take the Collier ordinance and adopt it in whole, I could go along with that better than I can go along with this. I agree with your point, and it's a good point, but, I mean, that's just my view. And
Now, you said you had a couple of things. You have anything
Well, no,
else?
I
Okay.
just want to,
All right.
Just a quick comment, because I think he makes a good point on several issues, because we did look at the Collier Code, and we looked at a lot of codes around the country. Part of the problem is the code as we currently have it, you calculate by frontage or square footage, and some people could put up a 24-foot tall sign, 400 square feet. Okay? That's and you have seen some people come along on US 41 and do 200 square foot, 24-foot by 10-foot wide sign. That's what the current code allows. And when we started this was part of, looking at the uses and everything on 41, and we realized how, for lack of a better word, cumbersome and outdated the sign code was. I will say that when you get all the strike-throughs out of here, this is about 12 pages smaller than it was when we began. And there's always room for improvement and for criticism. Nothing here says that they have to build to the right-of-way, but we give them that option. The big thing is the number of people who have complained that we're too small, the signs are too small, which I don't quite get that argument, because I've looked at the other codes, and 60 to 80 square feet is quite common. And when you look at the signs that the manufacturers, and I'm talking about the companies, their logos, they fit in a smaller footprint. It's one of the reasons that we were willing to go with a 60 square foot sign and not have the same color restrictions as the 96, because of when you look at that 60 square foot sign, you take out the 10% for architectural area, you're looking at 54 square feet. Well, most of these places only need 36 to get what they're trying to accomplish. And I agree with you that the signs could be smaller than we've proposed. But also it's a matter of how you address it. The other issue always is, especially on 41, is the speed at which traffic travels on 41 through the city of Bonita. There are those who have made the argument that a larger sign than, say, 60 or 80 should be there because of the speed at which they travel. But not controlling content, which we are hamstrung from doing, it's hard to tell somebody they need to make the letters the right size and so forth. So just to put all that into it, but the comments I think are appreciated from staff, and the point that these signs are plenty big, because there have been people in the past who thought they should be twice or three times the size that we're
Okay.
allowing.
All right.
Can
Okay.
I-
Any other comments? Yes,
I'd like
Fred.
to make one, well, first of all, we're given a bigger sign than they do down in Collier. That's bad enough, but then you're allowing it to be right up to 1 foot of the right-of-way when it's back from the right-of-way, 12 or 15 feet down there. It makes a huge difference in the way that sign looks. And you know what? The people drive just as fast on 41 here as they do immediately when you leave the city limits. So I just think until this is better figured out, that we're better off with what we have. So that's why I'm...
Any other comments?
I'd like to, I've looked at some of Collier's, and in some instances, we actually have less square footage than Collier does. So because of the way their code is set up, based on parcel size, if you're in a shopping center or PUD. So I want the LPA to understand that our proposal is not more than what Collier does. So there
Okay.
are sections where ours is definitely much less.
Mr. Chairman, I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Comment. One comment here. Audrey, you mentioned something about saying something to the council about what Rex was talking about, and I think there's something that bothers me about the logic of that, and perhaps we need to advise them to take a look at the comp plan as it regards existing things that are existing, and if you do what you say you are supposed to do with your sign or building, that it can remain that way. So, I mean, I think there's a little area there that we could have them take a look at.
Right.
Any way we could structure a motion to include that?
That's what I'm
Motion of it?
saying, yes.
I'm taking a lot of notes at this point because I think that's something, now remember, policy 1.4.1 belongs also to objective, remember it goes goals, objective, policy. So you have to also read objective 1.4 when looking at policy 1.4.1. You can't just read it out of context. And so I think that's something that, again, appropriate for both council and for the LPA, probably when we're doing the next EAR.
Okay.
What year that's scheduled for. But that's something certainly to be looking at.
I'm glad you brought that up, because objective 1.4 is precluding the 141. And it reinforces my argument that existing use is incompatible. That opens the door, and then policy 141 is more specific about it, that they will be allowed to continue. So it's very clear what the intent of the city was when we wrote this thing, that there were some existing, we had to get people to vote for this city, and that was a tough thing for us to do. So we couldn't be too harsh right up front. But when we wrote this thing, we had to take into existence what was here.
Right.
And that's what,
Let me go through an example here. First of all, Rex, I'm going to disagree with you as to what your last statement was, because I'm looking at objective 1.4 as we speak. So, and let me just read that out to the LPA. Existing uses that are incompatible with the range, intensity, and location of land uses identified on the city's future land use map, so that would say which category you fell in the flume, shall be considered inconsistent with the plan, and that's in quotes, inconsistent with the plan, and allowed to continue but shall be reduced by attrition. No new uses shall be permitted that are inconsistent with the future land use map and land use restrictions associated with the individual land use categories. So again, policy 1.4.1, which goes towards objective 1.4, says existing inconsistent uses. No, sir, let me finish, please. Not existing inconsistent signs, not inconsistent existing structures. Because if you made that argument, that would basically mean every house that is in the flood zone, every building that high wind, the coastal. We've had a plethora of regulations, some of it voluntarily because council wants aesthetically to look better, some of it not, whether we've had to do flood maps, so we can keep our community rating numbers, so we can keep low insurance. I mean, things that we find important for people in this community. I think policy 1.4.1, I'm going to take a different approach in my interpretation. Now, of course, I'm not a court of law, and neither is LPA member Sims. I think he made a great argument here, and I'm going to bring that up to council.
Okay.
Council had a look at this issue recently when it came to mobile homes, because we had a gentleman, Jackie remembers this, and we looked at this policy at that point. In the interchange area, had a mobile home, took it out. Lee County, accidentally allowed a replacement. We had one person assumed he could put the replacement. We took it to council because staff had to say, no, it's inconsistent. It was taken out, it was removed, it was voluntarily removed by the last owner. Now new owner wants to put a mobile home, surprise, surprise, next to other mobile homes. And council said, no, we will not allow you to do that. We're going to take the hard line on that. And if you follow LPA member Sims' logic, we would be mandated to always put that back, and we would never be able to change, because voluntarily, the last owner might not have realized that he did, just like the sign people. Some people don't realize they do something to hurt themselves, and council took a hard line. And
Let's,
it probably was the
let-
right decision.
Yes, you may, go ahead.
Okay, and I agree with what you're saying. Here, it says if it's incompatible. Now, here we have a structure or a sign that is legally permitted. And so it is not incompatible. It is legally there. It was permitted by Lee County or somebody, and it has a permit. So it is not incompatible. I agree with you. Uses that are incompatible with the location and land uses identified, that would be okay. But here we have something that is a permitted legal entity. It's there. The homeowner, the business owner has done everything he's supposed to do and has a sign and a permit and a permit and a permit. And so that does not fall into incompatible until we do this. And once we do this, then we've changed the.
But we had
Rex-
non-conforming provisions prior to the city's adoption. We've had non-conforming language and said, if the ordinance, or if the sign, we changed the regulations, all we did was add a better definition in there to be clearer at the request of the LPA. All we did was, we did change some thresholds, which we can do, but that's an existing sign. We're not saying, aha, now you don't meet the threshold because we changed that threshold. We're saying after effective on this date, if you fail to make that. So if you're saying that we're static and we can never make changes because we have to allow things to always stay because it was permitted at one time, but not necessarily should be permitted in the future, because at this time, we don't believe, and I'm not talking about me because quite frankly, I don't have any commercial businesses with any sign, so I don't have a vested interest in this. But if you're trying to say that we have to allow the community to remain static, that's fine. Now also understand, I'm going to address Mr. Forbes really quick here, and that is, as long as you understand, I understand what you're saying, let's not change the sign code until we have the perfect vision, and that's wonderful and that's admirable, and I would love it if we could do that in life. Obviously, I'm doing with two opposites here, so it's kind of interesting, communication. But when doing something like that, you do run the risk that during that time, before we get that perfect vision, different people will get in there. And council did postpone this. Council did, recognize there are sign permits that will be issued that will further delay, hinder, or destroy the potential chance for that vision. And understand that you're at that risk. And if that's fine, that's fine.
All right, let's see if we can move this along here. It appears as though one of the members is opposed to changing it. It appears another one of the members, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth here, another one of the members has a concern with one portion, if I'm describing that right, of the changes. So what I'm asking is there some way that we can come up with a motion to pass this on back to the council that shows our approval, with one exception, of the general changes here, but at the same time points out the one section on non-conforming use that Rex has a problem with?
I'd like to make a motion.
Could I ask a
Motion.
question to Audrey first,
Sure.
or to John or Jay? Are they, a person who has a non-conforming sign, are they really losing anything when they can make the choice to indefinitely continue their sign?
Jackie, you
Are they really losing? Because as long as they can keep their sign in repair and don't walk away from it, let it be derelict, and they maintain their business at that location, what have they really lost with this new, with this change?
Actually, the changes that we've made help them keep their sign. If you look at the current, right now, a change of copy is prohibited. We're saying they can change 25% every 12 months. So that's actually an improvement for them to be able to keep their sign, especially if they have more than one tenant in a building. We have 25% of value voluntarily, 50% of value involuntary currently. We're changing that to 50%. That's an increase. The others stay the same, except for it's now citywide instead of just in the corridor. The last one is loss nonconformity. That is a little more restrictive. It's at 25% instead of 50%. So, but the biggest one is the first one, because if you had a prohibited sign, a non-conforming sign, and you wanted to come in and change the copy, you couldn't do it. Now you can. Now there's a way to maintain and do this. So I think that this is as a balance. We took the two different sections. They had two different regulations and created a balance. And I think that overall, people who have a non-conforming sign, this is better for them. But you're absolutely correct. If I own a pizza parlor and I have a sign that says pizza and it's on a pole, it's non-conforming, as long as I maintain it, I keep it in good repair, it works, and as long as I continue to sell pizza and it says pizza, I can keep that sign basically indefinitely.
But you couldn't change the face.
I couldn't say change.
Joe's Pizza.
Well,
Now,
25%.
actually, that's a good point. I'm glad you said that. Because if it said Rex's Pizza and then Jay bought it and Jay wanted to come and say Jay's Pizza, currently no. Under the new regulation, yes. I could change that portion.
Up to 25%.
Up to 25%. Okay? So that's the way this is better. But, can you say it's a pizza place and now it's going to be a real estate office? No.
Okay, now, Carolyn, does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay. Now,
But it brings up a statement
Pizza's 20%.
that Carolyn raised, Mr. Sweet, and on page 26, under D, when this gets triggered, I guess the problem I have is maybe D on page 26, because here you're saying, well, it really doesn't make any difference, you can just go ahead and live, but under D, it says once this is triggered, it's immediately brought into compliance or the sign shall be removed.
You want me to take out the word immediately and just leave shall be
Let's
brought
take
into
out
compliance?
the sign, let's take out the whole D.
On 26?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right up here.
Because what we're saying is, once this triggers this non-conforming sign up here, the last line says, or it shall be removed. It doesn't say maybe, it says shall be, which means that you'll get a letter with a $250 a day penalty until you remove it.
what's,
Well, I
Read that.
I
Read
think
it
the
to
problem that we have is that D is only triggered if C above, if any of those items in C above are reached. D is only triggered if you lose nonconformity of one of those 6 items above in C.
But we've added this to it.
Could I we did not add something, because I will tell you, if you look at F4 on page 27, the language that's deleted, that's exactly the same language that is in number D. We just moved it.
Yeah, this is the same language that you're looking at. It's just that what Attorney Vance has done is to try to make sure everything was in one area so that it was easy for everybody to understand, so they didn't have to go bouncing back between pages. It's in one locale what happens how you lose the nonconformity.
Maybe it's
Well,
better reading,
isn't
but
this a
it's still the
trigger
same
for
language.
D? Am I reading this wrong? This
Yes.
non-conforming that we've got up here, it's going to trigger,
And
or
those,
the sign shall be removed.
and those 4 items are outlined in C above.
It will only be triggered if one of the items in C above occurs.
Correct.
So it's not an automatic thing. It's a-
Where does this come into it then?
Those items are listed in C above.
Well, that's what I say.
So,
Once it's triggered by this that is up on the screen, then D is triggered and it says, or the sign shall be removed.
It's not how I read it. If you do this, you're still non-conforming,
correct.
so it doesn't have to be removed.
Right. And let me rephrase.
It's only when you lose your nonconformity.
1 through 6 basically says if you don't, in other words, if you exceed the 25%, you would lose it.
Yeah, right.
If you don't maintain it, you would lose it. You can maintain it up to 50%. If it needs more than that, you could lose it. So this is just, for discussion purposes, the actual language is the 6 items in C.
Yeah, this protects the non-conforming sign,
Yes,
as long as you don't exceed those
exactly,
boundaries.
exactly.
So by doing 25%, not exceeding 25%, you are still non-conforming, but you're allowed to change copy.
Correct.
So I think that this part up here, Rex, only applies to those 6 examples in C above.
Right.
You understand that?
Oh, yeah, I understand that, but I say, this is a synopsis of the 6 items, in essence, but once you're triggered, then you shall remove it. You bring it into compliance, which you can't do, and then you've got to remove it. So I got a problem here with that.
Yeah. Sam, you had an idea on a,
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the changes I'd made by staff.
And find it consistent with the comp plan?
Right.
is there a second for that?
Second.
Okay, discussion, we've had a lot of discussion on certain things. Any
Just-
more
just
discussion,
real-
Carolyn?
Real quick, and I don't know if this is appropriate time or not, but there's a couple more definitions that I'd like to add to the front that are talked about in the back. And there's also a spot here where about the sandwich signs, but we called them, on page 48, we're calling them sandwich signs again. But back in the definitions, we defined them as sandwich board / sidewalk sign. So we should be consistent?
Okay, I will work with
That's all.
staff to make
It's
that change.
just,
So that will put a change into
and
what-
the other one is putting cabinet signs in the definitions, because
What-
it's
what's the
used.
word? I'm sorry?
Cabinet signs, it's used on
Cabinet
page 48, under 7.
Okay,
And
I'll take a look at that.
I had not heard that one before.
Yeah,
So
sometimes
those are- those are m-
get staff to change their words because adding additional definitions.
That's
a
pretty
lot of times
common.
it's colloquial, right, if it's colloquial.
Well, I was just trying to make them match.
I understand,
So that
but
people would
understand
have
that
no
when we do this, we
confusion.
make a bigger ordinance, and when we make a bigger ordinance, definitions are great if people need it for clarification, but if it's a common usage,
Well,
you
then
might not need
take
the definition.
Sandwich sign from this page and stick it on
And I can do
like
that.
3
I'll talk
things
with
in the
staff to see how to
definitions. Call it,
We'd add that to the motion, amend the motion to add those.
well, you could just
I'll make those changes.
put that
I'll check
right
with
in the
staff to see how-
definition there and make it 3 things. They're called sandwich boards or whatever I said.
I'll work
you
with
know.
staff to make sure we
Stick it
have the
there.
proper words, so they'll have to tell me where to stick it, but,
Yeah,
which they will.
sandwich board
And I did that on-
slash,
I did that on purpose,
yeah,
guys.
do sandwich board / sandwich sign /
I just
sidewalk
need-
sign.
I need to talk to staff, so we get that.
All right. So, any other discussion before we vote on the motion? And the motion now has been amended to add those items
Or
that
just
Carolyn brought.
clarify, just to
Yep.
correct it so that the definition section and the words used in the ordinance
All
run
right.
roughly the same.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay.
good.
Let's take a vote then. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
So we have 2 noes.
Okay, is there any other motion on this? Mr. Sims or Mr. Forbes? Okay,
Okay, good.
I'll convey the, well, obviously, they can watch the meeting on TV too, but I'll convey the
Right.
communications.
Okay, the next item is public comment. Do we have any public comment?
No problem.
Apparently not.
Not even Deb.
The next meeting is December 11th, 2014, and that's going to be back at 8:30.
9 o'clock?
It's going
Is
to
that okay?
change to 9 o'clock.
December 11th?
So the meeting's now going to be 9 o'clock from now on. Okay.
Also, I'd like to address the January meeting, if it's okay with the board members. I'd like to change that to the 15th, as there's Government Day on the 8th.
Okay,
City
you send
Council's-
something out on that?
Sure.
Yep. Okay.
Do we do minutes? Approval?
Minutes?
Yeah, we're going to do those next. I'd like to have a motion for approval of the minutes.
I so move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we're adjourned.